Alright, I'm going to read something. We're going to read Marcovaldo by Italo Calvino. I'm reading this as a special gift to my children. I read this to them a long time ago and they really enjoyed it. Alright. Author's note. These stories take place in an industrial city of northern Italy. The first in the series were written in the early 1950s and thus are set in a very poor Italy, the Italy of neo-realistic movies. The last stories date from the mid-60s, when the illusions of an economic bloom flourished. Right. Spring. Mushrooms in the city. The wind, coming to the city from far away, brings it unusual gifts noticed by only a few sensitive souls, such as hay fever victims who sneeze at the pollen from flowers of other lands. One day, to the narrow strip of ground flanking a city avenue came a gust of spores from God knows where, and some mushrooms germinated. Nobody noticed them except Marcovaldo, the worker, who caught his tram just there every morning. This Marcovaldo possessed an eye ill-suited to city life. Billboards, traffic lights, shop windows, neon signs, posters, no matter how carefully devised to catch the attention, never arrested his gaze, which might have been running over the desert sands. Instead, he would never miss a leaf yellowing on a branch, a feather trapped by a roof tile. There was no horsefly on a horse's back, no wormhole in a plank or fig peel squashed on the sidewalk that Marcovaldo didn't remark and ponder over, discovering the changes of season, the yearnings of his heart, and the woes of his existence. Thus, one morning, as he was waiting for the tram that would take him to Svav and Company, where he was employed as an unskilled laborer, he noticed something unusual near the stop in the sterile, encrusted strip of earth beneath the avenue's line of trees. At certain points, near the tree trunks, some bumps seemed to rise, and here and there they had opened, allowing roundish subterranean bodies to peep out. Bending to tie his shoes, he took a better look. They were mushrooms. Real mushrooms, sprouting right in the heart of the city. To Marcovaldo, the gray and wretched world surrounding him seemed suddenly generous with hidden riches. Something could still be expected of life, beyond the hourly wage of his stipulated salary, with inflation index, family grant, and cost of living allowance. On the job, he was more absent-minded than usual. He kept thinking that while he was there unloading cases and boxes, in the darkness of the earth, the slow, silent mushrooms, known only to him, were ripening their porous flesh, were assimilating underground humors, breaking the crust of clods. One night's rain would be enough, he said to himself. Then they would be ready to pick, and he couldn't wait to share his discovery with his wife and his 6 children. "I'm telling you," he announced during their scant supper, "in a week's time we'll be eating mushrooms. A great fry, that's a promise." And to the smaller children, who did not know what mushrooms were, he explained ecstatically the beauty of the numerous species, the delicacy of their flavor, the way they should be cooked, and so he also drew into the discussion his wife, Domitilla, who until then had appeared rather incredulous and abstracted. "Where are these mushrooms?" the children asked. "Tell us where they grow." At this question, Marcovaldo's enthusiasm was curbed by a suspicious thought. Now, if I tell them the place, they'll go and hunt for them with the usual gang of kids. Word will spread through the neighborhood, and the mushrooms will end up in somebody else's pan. And so that discovery, which had promptly filled his heart with universal love, now made him wildly possessive, surrounded him with jealous and distrusting fear. "I know where the mushrooms are, and I'm the only one who knows," he said to his children, "and God help you if you breathe a word to anybody." The next morning, as he approached the tram stop, Marcovaldo was filled with apprehension. He bent to look at the ground, and to his relief saw that the mushrooms had grown a little, but not much, and were still almost completely hidden by the earth. He was bent in this position when he realized there was someone behind him. He straightened up at once and tried to act indifferent. It was the street cleaner, leaning on his broom and looking at him. This street cleaner, whose jurisdiction included the place where the mushrooms grew, was a lanky youth with eyeglasses. His name was Amadigi, and Marcovaldo had long harbored a dislike of him, perhaps because of those eyeglasses that examined the pavement of the streets, seeking any trace of nature to be eradicated by his broom. It was Saturday, and Marcovaldo spent his free half-day circling the bed of dirt with an absent air, keeping an eye on the street cleaner in the distance, and on the mushrooms, and calculating how much time they needed to ripen. That night it rained. Like peasants who, after months of drought, wake up and leap with joy at the sound of the first drops, so Marcovaldo, alone in all the city, sat up in bed and called to his family, "It's raining, it's raining," and breathed in the smell of moistened dust and fresh mold that came from outside. At dawn, it was Sunday, with the children in a borrowed basket, he ran immediately to the patch. There were the mushrooms, erect on their stems, their caps high over the still-soaked earth. Hurrah! And they fell to gathering them. "Papa, look how many that man over there has found," Michelino said, and his father, raising his eyes, saw Amadigi standing beside them, also with a basket full of mushrooms under his arm. "Ah, you're gathering them too," the street cleaner said. "Then they're edible? I picked a few, but I wasn't sure. Farther down the avenue some others have sprouted, even bigger ones. Well, now that I know, I'll tell my relatives. They're down there arguing whether it's a good idea to pick them or not." And he walked off in a hurry. Marcovaldo was speechless. Even bigger mushrooms, which he hadn't noticed, an unhoped-for harvest, being taken from him like this before his very eyes. For a moment he was almost frozen with anger, fury. Then, as sometimes happens, the collapse of individual passion led to a generous impulse. At that hour, many people were waiting for the tram, umbrellas over their arms because the weather was still damp and uncertain. "Hey, you! Do you want to eat fried mushrooms tonight?" Marcovaldo shouted to the crowd of people at the stop. "Mushrooms are growing here by the street. Come along, there's plenty for all." And he walked off after Amadigi, with a string of people behind him. They all found plenty of mushrooms, and lacking baskets, they used their open umbrellas. Somebody said, "It would be nice to have a big feast, all of us together." But instead, each took his own share and went home. They saw one another again soon, however, that very evening, in fact, in the same ward of the hospital, after the stomach pump had saved them all from poisoning. It was not serious, because the number of mushrooms eaten by each person was quite small. Marcovaldo and Amadigi had adjacent beds. They glared at each other.